All right, let's talk Florida State Seminoles football. This is a program that came into the season, obviously, with a lot of question marks, and not all of them have been answered, but a whole heck of a lot of them have been for the positive. Mike Norvell and company deserve a lot of credit for their fast start, obviously heading into a bye this weekend. But there's been some recent news when it comes to the recruiting department, talking about what this strong start already means for Florida State. I think it's a sign of what is to come for the Seminoles. We'll get to that reporting in just 1 second. But first, I'm Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection. All right, the Florida State Seminoles Week 1 domination, even though it was a 2-touchdown victory over the Alabama Crimson Tide, I think we can all agree the score was a lot more lopsided than the actual domination on the football field. Big statement victory by Florida State, and they followed it up, of course, with it was not a fair matchup, but they got the job done in just cataclysmic fashion in Week 2. Now on a bye week, preparing for Kent State after the bye week, and then the real stretch of their schedule, conference play. And we're starting to see some recruiting reports, some rumblings going around about how Florida State's strong start is catching the eye of recruits, even some guys already committed. And I think it's a great sign and an indication of what is to come going forward for Florida State. Let's pull up this article right here, courtesy of 24/7 Sports. Florida State's quarterback commitment in the 2026 class, 3-star Jaden O'Neal, was tuned in from home as he watched the Seminoles upset number 8 Alabama in Week 1. O'Neal, who flipped to FSU from Oklahoma over the summer, gives head coach Mike Norvell a lot of credit for his team's ability to take down the Crimson Tide. To be able to watch and actually just see the man who's leading their team, Coach Mike Norvell, just see an extension of who he is on that football field, how it shows not only on the football field, but how he speaks to the guys in the locker room. I feel like just the character is what got those guys the win, O'Neal said. The report goes on to say, again, this is all courtesy of 24/7 Sports. He's been a fan of how explosive Gus Miles on offense has been so far at FSU, talking about O'Neal. He feels like the threat of Tommy Castellanos both in the air and on the ground has made it harder to defend the Noles offensively. My thoughts on the offense so far is they're really explosive, a lot more explosive than people give them credit for. When you have a quarterback who's a dual threat, a lot of defensive coordinators don't like that. It's just hard to scheme for a guy like that, he explained. I just feel like they're taking opportunities with the vertical passing game and giving those guys with the one-on-one matchups a chance. Yeah, so I think we're seeing something very clear here with Florida State, and this is sort of an anecdotal piece of information. Jaden O'Neal, right? Obviously a quarterback who's already committed, although in today's world, of course, being committed to a program, even signing with a program doesn't mean a whole lot where you can transfer at the drop of a hat, although there are some restrictions, some regulations coming to that, hopefully very soon in the world of college football. But even the recruiting ranks, you can be committed, hard commit, stable commit, and then flip at the drop of a hat. What Florida State has done here, guys, is with their early start, and obviously there's a lot of football left to go, but even if they, let's say, limp the rest of the way and finish just 6-6 and 7-5, it's already been set in stone with all of these recruits' minds, because these guys are all playing high school football. They're all stuck in their mind with everything going on with their lives, playing their games on Friday nights. What they saw was Florida State at home against Alabama, big underdogs, right? Kalen DeBoer on the hot seat. They saw them absolutely obliterate it, and then they followed them up Week 2 with it was an unfair annihilation, but they got it. It's not unfair. That's probably not the right word, but it just was unmatched, right? It wasn't a close game for obvious reasons. And then they followed it up, and then they got the bye, and now everyone's got a time to take a step back. All recruits, all potential transfers, and say, Florida State's really good. And that's just why first impressions matter. Strong starts to the season matter. You know who knew this? Nick Saban, former head coach of Alabama, obviously. He was outstanding in focusing on those Week 1 out-of-conference opponents. One of the reasons why he always liked scheduling them, there are really 2 reasons. One, he wanted to get his players experience in a neutral site to prepare them for a potential big bowl game, playoff game later in his career with Alabama when the 14 playoff got implemented. But it was also a way to send a statement to recruits, to get a message out there, not to play your, FCS D1AA opponents Week 1 and wait 3 or 4 weeks to play anybody. Everyone's really excited in September, end of August for the start of college football. We're all pumped. We're all thrilled. We want to see teams play. Most programs, they play a bunch of, nobodies, to be honest. And look, I played for a nobody. I played FCS football. And I can tell you, when we would play those big schools Week 1 and get absolutely obliterated, listen, it didn't make news. It wasn't even a headline. It was sort of like a ticker on ESPN at the bottom of the screen, and no one would really even talk about it. They wouldn't even show any highlights on ESPN or anything like that, right? It wasn't a matchup. It wasn't anything interesting. No recruits watched. Very few people cared. Florida State, Alabama, people cared. I cared. A lot of people watched it. I'm not a fan of the Alabama Crimson Tide. I'm not a fan of the Florida State University Seminoles. When I looked at what happened at that game, my first word was, wow. Alabama, Florida State is more physical. They're more disciplined. They have more big play talent. They're better, fundamentally sound, smarter coaches. Every box you want to check. Crowd engaged, atmosphere, everything you want to see from Florida State that was the hallmark of Florida State for like 30 years, it felt like, came to fruition. And I guarantee you, recruits across the entire sphere, whether they be guys already committed, future guys, or young guys just getting into the mix, they saw that. And I think it sent a powerful message to them. This is a massive move by Mike Norvell. One of the things that Norvell has done at Florida State, and he doesn't get enough credit for this, is he thinks multiple steps ahead. He's always on the recruiting trail, always thinking about that kind of thought, right? A lot of people are like, well, we need to recruit, we need to figure out how to get guys. But a lot of coaches, they're so scared of week-to-week performance. They're so scared of, maybe playing a tough opponent. I mean, you look at most programs, they don't play a good out-of-conference opponent. They don't. FSU has taken a different approach. They have the mindset of, we want to go and play against the top programs in college football because we recognize it's good. They were that way with Fisher. They were that way with Bowden. Mike Norvell has taken that on. It proved really good for Florida State a few years ago. I think we're going to see right now with Florida State in terms of recruiting, and I think we're going to see that return in short order for the Seminoles. What Norvell has done in terms of, and you notice, by the way, if you look at O'Neill's comments, he talks about Gus Malzahn, and I'll go back to the other report here, is he talks about Mike Norvell, the other half of the report, specifically, right? Mike Norvell is the guy leading the recruiting charge. He's the face of the program. Again, like Nick Saban, like every other head coach. You have to have the face of your program, seem in control, seem in charge, seem like the big dude, the biggest, baddest dude on the block. He's not afraid to play anybody. He's not afraid of Alabama, right? There's the old, we want Bama thing from a long time. Guess what? The Seminoles wanted Bama, they got them, and they dominated. And I guarantee you a lot of people noticed, and that's a great sign for the future of the Seminoles program. All right, we got a little bit more to talk about when it comes to FSU, but first, Seminoles fans, in the comment section below, obviously, bye week, right? A little bit of a relaxing. Seminoles don't get to play, which kind of stinks, but there's no stress either. So you get a chance to, just kick your feet up and watch some college football. What's one game, one matchup you're very interested to see this weekend, right? There's a lot of different ones, a lot of different ways certain games could go. Give us one matchup this weekend. Obviously, you don't have a huge hardcore dog in the fight with the Seminoles not playing, but let us know what other game, what other matchup you're really interested in seeing. Put it in the comment section below. All right, let's get into some other interesting news when it comes to the Seminoles. So this is from SI.com. ESPN recently released its FPI Football Power Index rankings, which measure a team's strength relative to a team's offense, defense, and special teams value based on expected points added to generate game and season level projections. FPI is a measure of team strength and predictor of future performance, not just a ranking of past results. Despite Florida State breaking school records in yards per play, 10.27, yards per pass, 18.4, and touchdowns of at least 35 yards, 7 last week, the Seminoles surprisingly sit at the number 26 spot, according to ESPN, which is kind of a shocker considering where they are right now. The report, PressI.com, went on to say, meanwhile, Alabama faces Georgia, Tennessee, and number 11 South Carolina as they look to rebuild after a 9-4 start and a rocky start, a 9-4 season and a rocky start to 2025. Talking about Alabama being significantly higher despite losing to Florida State in the regular season. FPI has them significantly higher than Florida State, which obviously doesn't make sense. Florida State now turns its attention to Kent State after its first bye week, with conference play opening against Virginia the following weekend with growing national scrutiny. Despite a perfect start, record-breaking numbers, and a top 10 ranking, ESPN's FPI suggests the Seminoles still have plenty to prove. With an unforgiving ACC schedule looming, Norvell's squad will get ample opportunities to silence doubters and cement itself as a legitimate playoff contender. Yeah, so I think FPI is a good metric. It's not a perfect metric, especially early in the season. There's all kind of weird data and stuff that goes into it. Obviously, it's one of those things, garbage in, garbage out. And I think this point early in the season, when you look at all the programs, there's a lot of garbage going in, so you're going to get a lot of garbage going out. It'll get refined once we get in the second half of the season. But this is absolutely perfect for Mike Norvell and Florida State. This is phenomenal news. Here's why. So recruits, transfers, things that matter in terms of headlines, they don't care about FPI, right? No 17-year-old kid who maybe wants to go to Florida State is trying to choose between Miami and FSU or Alabama and FSU or Georgia and FSU or LSU and FSU or whatever. They're not going to look at the FPI rankings. They're not going to sit there and say, how do I make this decision? I know, I'll go to ESPN.com/FPI and break down their analytics and see what they say in September. No, they're going to watch the games on TV. They're going to see the highlights on ESPN, and they're going to say, oh, FSU's really good. So that's what Norvell wants. But the one thing Norvell also wants simultaneously is to give his players and his coaching staff something to harp on, something to focus on to make sure they don't get complacent. So this is something that Norvell and the leaders in FSU can sit there and say, hey, people still don't believe in you. Look at this. ESPN says you're still not very good, right? And again, that's all he has to say, right? He doesn't have to say that publicly. He's not going to, but this is something he can use to keep Castellanos and the rest of these guys that have gone off to a great start, keep them very motivated, keep them in line to build off of this early season hype. Because while they already have the results from the recruiting trail already, I think, going to come into fruition, like I talked about with O'Neill's comments, and a lot of these recruits have already seen it, that first impression, that's been blazed into their mind. So outside of maybe a bowl game or a playoff appearance, there isn't going to be a lot of opportunities, except for maybe the Miami game, to really make a strong impression for recruiting for Florida State. Right? That's just the way it works. The season kind of runs together. It's a long season. Now it's about winning and executing, right? You did your job recruiting early in the season. Now it's about making sure your players do their job and having an enemy to target and say, listen, the media, ESPN, they still don't think you're very good. You beat Alabama, and Alabama's 10, 15 spots ahead of you, right? How does that happen? They still don't think you're a good football team. Now's your chance to prove them wrong. And look, if you break down Florida State's schedule, let's go ahead and pull it up here real quick to kind of wrap this sucker up. You can see, I mean, it's not an easy schedule, but there's some opportunities here, right? Obviously, Kent State should be a resounding victory. At Virginia is interesting. Then has maybe Trump game implications. Of course, on a Friday night, weird things can happen, so that's something to keep an eye on. Then you have Miami, right? That's obviously going to be one of the games of the year. Pittsburgh, Stanford, Wake Forest. I'm personally not too worried about any of those. I mean, you could lose anywhere, any game. I don't like going out to the West Coast, but considering Stanford's not the best, I think that's a decent opportunity there. Then you go to South Carolina to play Clemson, the upstate of South Carolina. That's going to be very interesting because Clemson struggled offensively, but that's still a very good defense, and that's a tough place to play, so that's going to be a big one. Vodtech at home, better than Vodtech in Plattsburgh, and then NC State, and then at Florida, which beginning of the season, that looked a little daunting, looks a little less so now, even though it is a rivalry game on the road. So there's a great opportunity here for Florida State, and I think Norvell probably recognizes that and says, listen, we got to stay internally very focused. We cannot get complacent. We can't go ahead and say, oh my goodness, we're rolling, we're crushing it. I need something from Norvell's perspective. I need something to keep my guys motivated, have the chip on their shoulder like Castellanos did when he called out Alabama. What better example of a chip than ESPN saying, listen, you're not very good based on the data. Now you can use that to your advantage. Norvell has done this in the past with these kind of reports. He's a very smart coach. Again, he's the guy that understands more than just about any coach in the game right now, except for maybe Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart. I'll throw Ryan Day in there as well. Not just Steve Sarkisian maybe, but he's more of an X's and O's guy. He understands the cycles of a season and the importance of doing certain things beginning of the season, middle of the season, to win in recruiting and to keep players engaged. He's doing it. I think he will do it right here with this report. And again, this is good news for Florida State. I know it's disappointing to see this kind of disrespect for Florida State fans who want to see everyone recognizing the strong start you've had and the bright future you have this season. But I think this is actually a good opportunity for the Seminoles. I'm excited to see what they do the rest of the way. But I'm just going to go back to the very opening report here and why the future is so bright for FSU, because every single recruiter in the country, this is the final takeaway, guys. Every single recruit in the country just saw Alabama, the symbol of college football, right? They still are, even though Nick Saban's gone. They're the symbol of college football, and they saw Florida State wax them. And that was ingrained in everyone's mind, and that is a great sign for the future of this program.